Hey there, my awesome listeners! Tonight, we're diving deep into a tale where pack loyalty collides with destiny, and sometimes the person you're meant to destroy is the one you're destined to love forever. Chapter 1: Blood and Moonlight. The scent hit me like a lightning strike straight to my soul. Pine and cedar, wild mountain air, and something dangerously masculine that made my wolf surge forward with a hunger I'd never experienced. I froze on the ridge overlooking neutral territory, my heart hammering against my ribs as every nerve ending came alive with electric awareness. This couldn't be happening. Not now. Not with him. Raven, what's wrong? My beta Marcus appeared beside me, golden eyes scanning the moonlit forest below. You look like you've seen a ghost. More like scented my destruction. I forced my breathing steady, refusing to acknowledge the way my skin tingled with primal recognition. Nothing. Just checking for border violations. The lie tasted bitter, but admitting the truth would mean accepting something that could never be. The Silverwood pack had been our enemies for 3 generations. My grandfather died defending our territory from their brutal expansion. My father lost everything to their calculated betrayal. As alpha of the Shadowmir pack, I'd sworn the same blood oath they all had. Never trust a Silverwood wolf. Never show mercy. Never forget the debt written in our ancestors' blood. So why did every fiber of my being want to leap down that ridge and claim whatever was calling to me like a siren song? Raven. Marcus grabbed my arm, claws extending in alarm. Movement below. My stomach dropped as figures materialized through the trees. Silverwood Patrol, moving with the arrogant confidence of wolves who believed they owned the world. 6 warriors in human form, but their predatory grace marked them as killers. They were deep in neutral territory, farther than any treaty allowed. But it was the alpha leading them that made my blood freeze, then ignite with equal intensity. Tall, powerfully built, moving with the fluid dominance of someone who'd never known defeat. Even in the darkness, I could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the mark of an alpha in his prime. Kieran Silverwood, the bastard who'd humiliated me at the peace talks 2 years ago, looking me dead in the eye while telling the council my pack was too weak to survive another winter. The same wolf whose scent was currently making me dizzy with forbidden desire. Absolutely not. This had to be some cosmic joke. I started down the ridge before Marcus could stop me, boots sliding on loose stone. Protocol demanded I report this incursion, but protocol had never accounted for finding your worst enemy trespassing while your wolf howled, "Mate," with every heartbeat. Raven, wait. I ignored Marcus's warning, using every ounce of alpha training to mask my scent as I approached. The Silverwood wolves were arguing about something, voices low but heated. Perfect. Nothing like internal conflict to make treaty violations easier to prove. I got within 20 feet before Kieran's head snapped up, those pale gray eyes finding mine through the darkness with unnerving accuracy. The words on his lips died, and for a heartbeat that stretched into forever, we just stared at each other. The world shifted on its axis. Heat flooded my veins like liquid fire, and I felt my wolf surge forward with a need so primal it nearly brought me to my knees. Not the need for violence, the need for him. For his touch, his scent, his body against mine in ways that would have made my ancestors roll in their graves. The mate bond. Undeniable. Impossible. Absolutely catastrophic. Well. Kieran's voice was rough velvet, carrying easily across the charged space between us. The little Shadowmir alpha, prowling around past her bedtime. The condescension snapped me back to reality, like a physical blow. I stalked closer, letting my alpha presence unfurl like dark wings. His wolves shifted nervously, but Kieran himself stood perfectly still, watching me approach with an intensity that made my skin burn. This is neutral territory, Silverwood. I kept my voice level despite the chaos in my chest. You're in direct violation of the peace accords. His smile was slow, predatory, and entirely too attractive. Am I? I think you'll find we're well within our rights to pursue a threat across neutral ground. What threat? The rogue who's been leaving mutilated deer carcasses along our border for the past week. His eyes never left mine, but I caught the subtle flare of his nostrils, as if he was fighting the same overwhelming scent recognition that was making me lightheaded. Someone sending us a very clear message. Someone who wants war. Ice formed in my stomach. We'd found identical carcasses on our side, throats torn, bodies drained in ways no natural wolf would kill. I'd assumed they were Silverwood intimidation tactics. You think my pack is responsible for? I think, Kieran interrupted, stepping closer, that desperation makes even honorable wolves consider dishonorable options. False flag operations. Psychological warfare. Ring any bells? The accusation hit like a physical slap. I closed the distance between us before rational thought could intervene, moving until we stood so close I could see the silver flecks in his storm gray eyes, could feel the dangerous heat radiating from his powerful frame. "How dare you?" I whispered, my voice deadly quiet. "My pack has more honor in our smallest members than your entire bloodline has ever possessed." Something flickered across his expression, surprise, perhaps approval, but it vanished before I could identify it. "Honor?" He laughed, but the sound held no humor. "Your grandfather ambushed my great-uncle during sacred moon rites. Your father seduced and abandoned my aunt when she carried his child. Enlighten me about Shadowmir honor, little alpha." Fury blazed through me, clean and familiar, and so much easier than the confusing pull I felt toward him. This I could handle. Rage didn't leave me aching with impossible wants. "My grandfather defended our territory from Silverwood expansion," I snarled, my wolf pressing against my skin. "And my father never touched your delusional aunt. She tried seducing him to gain access to our sacred grounds, and when he rejected her advances, she fabricated lies to salvage her reputation." Lies? Kieran's eyes flashed wolf-bright in the moonlight. "She died alone and heartbroken because of him. She died because she couldn't handle rejection like an adult." His hand shot out, fingers closing around my wrist with precisely enough pressure to stop me mid-sentence. The touch was pure electricity, sending shockwaves at my arm that made my wolf whimper with desperate need. I watched his pupils dilate, heard his sharp intake of breath as the mate bond flared between us like wildfire. He felt it. Every impossible, terrible, perfect bit of it. For a moment that lasted eternity, we stood frozen, his thumb unconsciously stroking across my racing pulse while my traitorous heart hammered against the connection. Pine and cedar and something uniquely, intoxicatingly him flooded my senses until thinking became impossible. "Mate." The word whispered through my soul like both prayer and damnation. Then reality crashed back like ice water, and I jerked away from him as if his touch burned. "Don't ever touch me again," I managed, hating how breathless I sounded. Kieran stared at his hand as if it had betrayed him, then slowly clenched it into a fist. When he looked at me again, his expression was carefully, dangerously blank. "Find your rogue, Alpha," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that made my wolf whimper. "Before innocent blood spills and this cold war becomes something much hotter." He turned to leave, his warriors falling into formation around him with practiced ease. But he paused after 3 steps, looking back over his shoulder with eyes that held too much knowledge, too much heat, too much of everything I couldn't afford to want. And Raven. My name on his lips was like a caress and a threat combined. Stay off neutral ground after midnight. The darkness brings out the worst in all of us. I watched them disappear into the forest, my entire body trembling with reaction. Only when their sense faded did Marcus dare approach, his expression grim with understanding. "That was," he began. "Nothing." I cut him off sharply. "That was nothing." But as we headed back toward Shadowmir territory, I couldn't stop my fingers from tracing the spot where Kieran had touched me, couldn't stop my wolf from howling with loss and longing and the terrible, impossible recognition of a fated mate I could never claim. He was my enemy, my father's enemy, my pack's enemy, and, according to every instinct I possessed, he was also mine. Chapter 2. Denial and Desire. 3 days later, I still couldn't get his scent out of my head. I'd scrubbed my skin raw, burned sage in my cabin, even rolled in the herb gardens behind the pack house. Nothing worked. Pine and cedar clung to my memory like smoke, invading my dreams and making me wake up aching with needs I refused to name. "You look like hell," my Gamma Riley observed, dropping into the chair across from my desk with her usual lack of ceremony. "When's the last time you slept?" "I'm fine." I didn't look up from the Border Patrol reports I was pretending to read. The words blurred together anyway, meaningless compared to the chaos in my head.
Right.
"And I'm the Queen of England." Riley leaned back, studying me with those sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "This is about the Silverwood Patrol, isn't it? Marcus told me you seemed off after the encounter." My pen snapped in half. Riley raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment on my sudden display of supernatural strength. "Want to talk about what really happened out there?" Nothing happened. The lie came easier this time, well practiced after 3 days of internal repetition. "Kieran Silverwood is an arrogant bastard who thinks he can intimidate me. End of story." Aha. Riley's tone suggested she wasn't buying it for a second. "So, this has nothing to do with the fact that you've been avoiding the eastern border, like it's contaminated with silver?" Damn her observation skills. Before I could craft another deflection, Marcus burst through my office door without knocking, something he'd never done in the 5 years he'd been my beta. "Raven, we have a problem," he said, his face grim. "Another body." My blood turned to ice. "Where?" "Half a mile from where we encountered the Silverwood Patrol. Same memo, throat torn, body drained. But..." He paused, running a hand through his sandy hair. "This one's different." "Different how?" "It's not a deer." Marcus met my eyes, and I saw my own horror reflected there. "It's human. A hiker, by the looks of his gear. And Raven, there are Silverwood scent markers all around the kill site." The bottom dropped out of my world. A human death meant council involvement, federal investigation, exposure risks that could destroy everything our people had worked to build. And if Silverwood scents were present, they wouldn't, I whispered, then immediately reconsidered. Maybe they would. Maybe this was exactly the kind of calculated escalation Kieran's father would have approved before his death last year. Actually, they might. There's more. Marcus looked like he'd rather eat silver than continue. Logan's team found fresh tracks leading back towards Silverwood territory. Boot prints, not paw prints. Whoever did this stayed human throughout the attack. My wolf stirred uneasily. Killing in human form was considered an abomination among our kind. It went against every instinct we possessed. Only rogues or the truly depraved murdered without shifting first. "Get a full forensics team to the site," I ordered, my mind racing through implications and responses. "I want photos, scent samples, DNA, if possible. And contact Sarah at the FBI liaison office. If this goes public." "Already done," Marcus said. "But Raven, there's something else. The council's called an emergency session. Tonight. And they've specifically requested both you and Kieran attend." Of course they had. The last thing I needed was to face him again while my emotions were this raw, this confused. But refusing a council summons would be seen as weakness, and weakness was something I couldn't afford with a potential war brewing. "Fine." I stood, ignoring the way my hands shook slightly. "Set up a security detail. If this is Silverwood retaliation for something we didn't do, I'm not walking into their territory unprotected." Riley and Marcus exchanged a look that I pretended not to see. They knew something was wrong with me, but thankfully neither pressed the issue.
Yet.
For hours later, I found myself walking into the neutral meeting hall with my heart hammering like I was heading into battle. The ancient stone building sat on the border between all 5 pack territories, blessed ground where no wolf could shift without invitation from the council elders. Kieran was already there. He stood near the massive fireplace, speaking quietly with Elder Morrison from the Red River Pack. Even in the formal setting, he radiated the kind of dangerous confidence that made lesser wolves step aside without thinking. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, emphasizing the powerful lines of his body in ways that made my mouth go dry. Then he looked up and saw me. The conversation died on his lips as our eyes met across the room. For a heartbeat, I saw something raw and hungry flicker in his gaze before he locked it down behind cool indifference. But I'd seen it, and my wolf responded with a purr of satisfaction that I absolutely did not appreciate. Alpha Raven, Elder Morrison greeted me warmly, apparently oblivious to the tension crackling between Kieran and me. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Elder. I incline my head respectfully, hyper-aware of Kieran's presence just 3 feet away. His scent was somehow even more intoxicating in the enclosed space, and I had to consciously control my breathing to keep from making an embarrassing scene. Before we begin, Morrison continued, I should mention that Elder Christine specifically requested both of you arrive early. She has some concerns about the situation that she wanted to discuss privately. As if summoned by her name, Elder Christine emerged from the council chamber's inner sanctum. At nearly 90, she was the oldest living werewolf in North America and commanded respect from even the most dominant alphas. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her pale blue eyes missed absolutely nothing. Those eyes lingered on me for a moment, then shifted to Kieran, then back again. Something like knowing amusement flickered across her weathered features. How interesting, she murmured, too quietly for Morrison to hear but perfectly clear to Kieran and me. How very, very interesting. My stomach dropped. Elder Christine was known for her supernatural sensitivity to pack dynamics and mate bonds. If she'd picked up on the connection between us. Elder Christine, Kieran said smoothly, his voice betraying nothing. I understand there's been a development in the rogue situation. Indeed. Her smile was enigmatic as she gestured for us to follow her into a smaller private room. But I find myself more curious about other developments. Tell me, children, have either of you experienced any unusual sensations lately? Heightened awareness? Unexpected reactions to certain scents or sounds? I felt the blood drain from my face. Beside me, Kieran had gone perfectly still in the way that meant his wolf was fighting for control. I'm not sure what you mean, Elder, I managed. Of course you don't. Christine settled into a high-backed chair with the grace of someone who'd been managing pack politics since before I was born. Sit, both of you. We have much to discuss before the full council convenes. I chose the chair farthest from Kieran, but even across the small room, I could feel the pull between us like a physical force. When he shifted slightly, adjusting his position, my wolf perked up with embarrassing interest. The human death is concerning, Christine began without preamble. But it's not why I asked to speak with you both privately. Then why? Kieran started. Because, she interrupted, her eyes twinkling with something that might have been mischief. The moon goddess has a sense of humor that borders on the cruel. And because I've been alive long enough to recognize the signs of a fated bond between 2 wolves who would rather die than admit it. The room went dead silent. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the elderly wolf who just shattered my world with casual observation. There's no bond, Kieran said, his voice carefully controlled. The Shadowmir Alpha and I are enemies. Nothing more. Are you? Christine leaned forward, studying us both with interest. Because from where I sit, I see 2 wolves fighting very hard against something much stronger than hatred. I see the way you're both consciously controlling your breathing, the way you've positioned yourselves to maximize distance while still maintaining visual contact. I see the flush in young Raven's cheeks and the tension in your shoulders, Kieran. I wanted to crawl under the floor and disappear. Even if that were true, I said carefully, it doesn't matter. My pack will never accept a Silverwood mate. Just as his pack would never accept me. Wouldn't they? Christine's smile was mysterious. You might be surprised what people will accept when faced with the alternative of watching their alpha slowly go mad from bond denial. That won't happen, Kieran said firmly. We're not children who can't control our impulses. No, Christine agreed. You're alpha wolves in your prime, which makes it infinitely worse. The stronger the wolf, the stronger the bond. And the stronger the bond. She let the sentence hang meaningfully. I knew exactly what she meant. Strong wolves who fought their fated bonds didn't just go mad, they became dangerous. Unstable. a threat to everyone around them. There has to be another way, I whispered. Oh, child. Christine's expression softened with genuine sympathy. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. If she's chosen to bind you to each other, she has her reasons. The question is whether you'll fight those reasons until they destroy you both, or whether you'll trust that love is stronger than the hatred your families have built. Love. Kieran's laugh was bitter. Elder, with respect, whatever this is, it isn't love. It's biology.
Chemistry.
A cosmic joke at our expense. Is it? Christine stood, moving to the window that overlooked the moonlit forest. Tell me, Kieran, what did you feel when you touched her 3 nights ago? He went rigid. How did you? I feel the echo of faded bonds, especially strong ones. And yours. She turned back to us, her expression grave. Yours is strong enough to reshape the political landscape of our entire region. Strong enough to either end the feud between your packs or escalate it into open warfare. It won't escalate into anything, I said firmly, because nothing is going to happen between us. Won't it? Christine returned to her chair, settling back with the patience of someone who'd outlived 5 generations of stubborn alphas. Then you won't mind if I assign you both to investigate the rogue killings together? My heart stopped. What? The council has decided that this situation requires cooperation between all packs. Since Silverwood and Shadowmir territories border the kill sites, it makes sense for both alphas to take point on the investigation. Absolutely not, Kieran said at the same time I said, that's impossible. Is it? Christine's smile was serene and utterly implacable. Because I've already informed the council that you've both agreed. The formal announcement will be made during tonight's session. I stared at her in horror. You can't force us to work together. I'm not forcing anything. I'm simply encouraging cooperation for the good of all our people. Her expression grew serious. Children, a rogue capable of killing humans in our territory is a threat to our entire way of life. Personal feelings must take a backseat to protecting our species from exposure. She was right, and I hated her for it. Kieran must have reached the same conclusion because his shoulders sagged slightly in defeat. How long? Until the threat is neutralized. Christine stood again, smoothing down her skirts. I suggest you both learn to manage your chemistry quickly, because starting tomorrow, you'll be spending a great deal of time together. As she headed for the door, she paused to look back at us with those knowing eyes. Oh, and children? A word of advice from someone who's seen countless faded bonds over the decades. Fighting this will only make it stronger. The moon goddess is nothing if not persistent. Then she was gone, leaving Kieran and me alone in the suffocating silence. We sat there for what felt like hours, neither willing to be the first to speak, to acknowledge what she'd said, to admit that everything had just become impossibly complicated. Finally, Kieran cleared his throat. This doesn't change anything between us. No, I agreed, even though we both knew it was a lie. Nothing at all. But as I looked at him across the small room, at the silver threading through his dark hair, at the strong line of his jaw, at the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for me, I knew everything had already changed. We were fated mates whether we wanted to be or not. And tomorrow, we'd be forced to work together while pretending that every instinct we possessed wasn't screaming at us to claim each other. This was going to be a disaster. Chapter 3. Forced Proximity. The crime scene was worse than I'd imagined. I stood at the edge of the clearing where the hiker had died, breathing through my mouth to avoid the lingering scent of blood and terror. Even 48 hours later, the metallic tang hung heavy in the air, mixed with something else. Something wrong that made my wolf pace restlessly beneath my skin. The attack happened around sunset, Kieran said from behind me, his voice professionally neutral. We'd been working together for exactly 3 hours, and the careful distance we maintained felt like a physical barrier between us. Based on the blood spatter patterns, the victim was facing his attacker when the killing blow landed. I forced myself to focus on the evidence, instead of the way his scent was driving me slowly insane in the confined space. No defensive wounds? None. Either he knew his killer, or they moved too fast for him to react. I crouched beside the disturbed earth where the body had been found, studying the scene with professional detachment. The victim had been a college student from Portland, hiking alone through national forest land that bordered our territories. Wrong place, wrong time, except, this is deliberate, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Look at the location. Kieran moved closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. What do you mean? I pointed to the worn trail that cut through the clearing. This is the most popular hiking route in the area. The killer chose a spot where discovery was guaranteed. They wanted the body found. Why? To send a message. I stood, careful not to brush against him, though my wolf whimpered at the missed opportunity for contact. Think about it. The first kills were deer left on our borders, obvious territorial markings. Now a human death in neutral territory, with evidence pointing toward both our packs. Understanding dawned in his gray eyes. Someone's trying to frame us, or pit us against each other. I pulled out my phone to photograph the scene from different angles, grateful for something to occupy my hands. Create enough suspicion and fear to justify open warfare. But who benefits from war between our packs? That was the question, wasn't it? I lowered my phone, studying the tree that surrounded the clearing. Somewhere out there, a rogue was playing a dangerous game with all our lives. We need to examine the other kill sites, I said. Look for patterns we might have missed when we thought this was simple territory dispute. Kieran nodded, then hesitated. There's something else. Something I didn't mention yesterday at the council meeting. I looked at him sharply. What? 2 of my border patrol reported strange scents near the deer carcasses. Not pack scent from any territory they recognized. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. At the time, we assumed it was contamination from decay, but now it could be our rogue signature. I felt a flutter of excitement at the potential breakthrough, quickly followed by unease at how naturally we were working together. Do you have scent samples? Back at my territory. He paused, as if weighing his words. You'd need to come with me to examine them properly. The thought of entering Silverwood territory made my stomach clench with anxiety, and not entirely the kind related to pack politics. Being alone with Kieran on his home ground would be challenging enough, without the added complication of the mate bond that seemed to grow stronger every moment we spent together. Fine, I said, because investigation protocol demanded it. But we're taking my beta as backup. Agreed. And I'll have Marcus meet us at the border. The fact that he knew my beta's name shouldn't have surprised me. Alphas made it their business to know their enemies' inner circles. But something about the casual way he said it suggested more familiarity than intelligence reports would provide. How would you know Marcus? I asked as we headed back toward our vehicles. Kieran was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, we went to school together. Before everything went to hell between our packs. I stopped walking. You knew Marcus before you became Alpha? We were friends. The admission seemed to cost him something. Best friends, actually. Until my father found out and forbade any contact with Shadowmir wolves. A dozen questions crowded my mind, but before I could voice any of them, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. What's wrong? I answered immediately, because Marcus only called during investigations if there was an emergency. Raven, thank God. We have a situation. Can you get back to the pack house immediately? Ice formed in my stomach. What kind of situation? The kind that involves federal agents asking very pointed questions about our whereabouts 3 nights ago. Shit. FBI. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, actually. They're investigating reports of unusual predator activity in the national forest. Someone tipped them off about the human death before we could manage the situation through proper channels. I closed my eyes, feeling the walls closing in around us. Federal involvement meant scrutiny we couldn't afford, questions we couldn't answer, and exposure risks that could destroy everything. Stall them, I ordered. Don't let anyone answer questions without counsel present. I'm on my way. There's more. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They're not just here for us. They've got teams heading to Silverwood territory, too. And Raven, they mentioned they have witnesses. The phone slipped from my suddenly nerveless fingers. Kieran caught it before it hit the ground, his reflexes inhumanly fast. What's wrong? Federal agents. I managed. At both our territories. They have witnesses. His face went carefully blank. Witnesses to what? I don't know, but my phone buzzed with another call. This time it was Riley, and I could hear shouting in the background. Raven, where are you? She demanded without preamble. We've got a pack of federal agents crawling all over the territory, and 3 of our juveniles are missing from the morning patrol. Missing how? They went out to check the eastern border and never reported back. Their scents just stop about 2 miles from the territory line. The bottom dropped out of my world. 3 young wolves, barely old enough to run patrol, vanished without a trace while federal agents investigated supernatural murders. I'm coming, I said, but even as I spoke, Kieran's phone started ringing. He answered with sharp efficiency. What? When? How many? His expression grew grimmer with each response. Don't do anything until I get there. Nothing, do you understand? He hung up and looked at me with eyes that held the same fear I was feeling. 4 of my wolves are missing, he said quietly. Took off after a strange scent trail this morning and haven't been seen since. 7 missing wolves. Federal investigation. A rogue killer escalating their game. This isn't coincidence, I whispered. No. Kieran's voice was grim. It's a trap. And we just walked right into it. My phone rang again. Elder Christine this time, and I knew before answering that whatever she had to say would make everything worse. Raven, child, where are you? Investigating the kill site with Kieran. Christine, we have a problem. Several problems, she interrupted. The federal agents aren't the worst of it. I've just received word that the Northwest Pack Alliance has called an emergency session. They're questioning the Council's decision to allow Silverwood and Shadowmir to investigate independently. What does that mean? It means, Christine said with deadly quiet, that if you don't solve this situation within 48 hours, both your packs will be placed under Alliance oversight. Your alpha status will be suspended, and outside wolves will be brought in to manage your territories. The words hit like physical blows. Loss of alpha status wasn't just political death, it was spiritual annihilation for wolves like us. Our entire identity was wrapped up in leading our packs. They can't. They can and they will, unless you give them reason not to. Christine's voice softened slightly. Find those missing wolves, children. Find them, find a rogue, and prove that cooperation between your packs is possible. Because if you don't, she didn't need to finish the threat. We both knew what happened to displaced alphas. Most didn't survive the loss of pack bonds. The few who did became rogues themselves, dangerous and unpredictable. 48 hours, I repeated numbly. 48 hours, Christine confirmed. The clock starts now. The line went dead, leaving Kieran and me staring at each other in the sudden silence of the forest clearing. Well, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. I guess we're officially stuck with each other. I looked at him, at my enemy, my fated mate, my only hope of saving everything I'd worked to build, and felt the last of my resistance crumble. Then we better figure out how to work together, I said. Fast. Because 48 hours wasn't just a deadline. It was all the time we had left before everything fell apart. Chapter 4. Secrets and Revelations. Silverwood territory was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the dark, forbidding fortress I'd imagined, their pack lands were surprisingly open and welcoming. Rolling hills covered in silver birch trees gave way to a collection of modern buildings that looked more like a small town than a military compound. Children played in communal gardens while adults went about their daily routines with the easy confidence of people who felt completely secure in their home. It was nice, which made hating them significantly more complicated. Surprised? Kieran asked, noticing my expression as we pulled through the main gate. I expected something different, I admitted, then immediately regretted the honesty. Showing surprise to an enemy was a tactical error. What, exactly? Razor wire and guard towers. There was amusement in his voice that made my cheeks burn. Something like that. Sorry to disappoint. We saved the intimidation tactics for actual threats. The casual insult stung more than it should have, especially since I'd probably deserved it. Kieran led me through the settlement toward a large building that looked part laboratory, part conference room. Several wolves stopped to stare as we passed, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. I kept my head high and my posture confident, even though walking into enemy territory felt like stepping into a trap. Ignore them, Kieran said quietly. Most of them have never seen a Shadowmir wolf this close. Because your fathers made sure of that. Yes, they did. He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression serious. Just like your father did. This feud has been fed by fear and ignorance for 3 generations, Raven. Maybe it's time to change that. The way he said my name sent shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with the cool afternoon air. I was saved from responding by the appearance of a woman in her 40s with graying brown hair and intelligent dark eyes. Alpha, she greeted Kieran formally, then looked at me with undisguised curiosity. And you must be Alpha Raven. I'm Dr. Sarah Chun, our pack's forensics specialist. I shook her offered hand, grateful for the professional interaction. Dr. Chun. Kieran mentioned you've been analyzing the scent samples from the kill sites. Among other things, she gestured for us to follow her into the building. What I found is concerning. The laboratory was impressively equipped, with analysis stations that looked like they belonged in a federal facility. Dr. Chun led us to a workstation covered with sealed sample containers and printouts. The scent signatures from all the kill sites contain the same anomaly, she began without preamble. A chemical compound that doesn't occur naturally in any North American wolf bloodline. Kieran leaned forward, his attention focused entirely on her words. What kind of compound? That's where it gets complicated. Dr. Chun pulled up a chart on her computer. The base structure is definitely lupin, but it's been artificially enhanced. Modified. My blood turned to ice. Modified how? Steroids, amphetamines, and something else I can't identify. Whatever this compound is, it's designed to increase aggression, suppress rational thought, and enhance physical strength far beyond normal werewolf capabilities. Kieran and I exchanged a look of horror. An artificially enhanced rogue was bad enough, but the implications went much deeper. Someone's creating super soldiers, I whispered. That's my assessment, Dr. Chun confirmed grimly. And based on the concentration levels in these samples, they've been at it for months, possibly years. But who would do this? Kieran demanded. And why target our territories specifically? Before Dr. Chun could respond, commotion erupted outside the building. Shouting, the sound of running feet, and underneath it all, a howl of pure anguish that made my wolf surge to the surface. We rushed outside to find chaos. Wolves in both human and shifted form were running toward the eastern boundary of the territory, following a scent trail I could detect even from a distance. Blood. Fear. And something else that made my stomach clench with dread. The missing wolves. Kieran breathed and took off running. I followed without thinking, my body moving on instinct as we raced through the silver birch forest. The scent grew stronger with each step, blood and terror and the wrongness that had been haunting all the kill sites. We found them in a small clearing about a mile from the main settlement. 4 Silverwood wolves, barely recognizable as the strong young adults they'd been that morning. They were alive, but only just. Their bodies were covered in bite marks and claw wounds that looked self-inflicted, and their eyes held the vacant stare of minds pushed beyond breaking point. Jesus, someone whispered behind us. Kieran was already moving, dropping to his knees beside the nearest victim, a young woman with silver blonde hair matted with blood. Get Dr. Chun, he ordered, his voice steady despite the horror of what we were seeing. And call the medical team. Now. But even as his people rushed to help, I could see the truth written in the glazed eyes and trembling limbs of the survivors. Whatever had been done to them, whatever they'd been forced to endure, had broken something fundamental inside them. The missing Shadowmir wolves, I said, the words scraping my throat raw. They're out there somewhere, aren't they? Going through the same thing. Kieran looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw genuine fear in his storm-gray eyes. We have to find them, before whoever's doing this finishes what they started. Dr. Chen arrived with a full medical team, taking charge with the efficient competence of someone who'd seen too much trauma over the years. As they worked to stabilize the victims, she pulled Kieran and me aside. They've been dosed with massive amounts of the enhancement compound, she said quietly. It's caused severe psychological breakdown and what looks like temporary loss of higher brain function. Temporary? I asked, clinging to the hope in that word. I don't know. I've never seen anything like this before. Her expression was grim. But given the level of chemical saturation in their systems, I'd estimate they were exposed continuously for at least 12 hours. 12 hours of chemical-induced madness. I couldn't imagine the torture these young wolves had endured. There's more, Dr. Chen continued. Based on the wound patterns and residual sense, they did this to each other. Whatever was in their systems made them attack their own pack mates. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the enhancement compound could turn pack mates against each other, could strip away the fundamental bonds that held wolf society together. It's a weapon, Kieran said, voicing what we were all thinking. Someone's created a biological weapon specifically designed to destroy pack structures from within. But who has that kind of knowledge? That kind of resources? Before anyone could answer, my phone rang. Marcus, his voice tight with panic. Raven, thank God. We found them. The missing wolves? Yes, but... Raven, you need to get back here now. Something's wrong with them. Something's very wrong. I closed my eyes, already knowing what he was going to say. They attacked each other. How did you? Never mind. Just get back here. And bring medical support. We're going to need all the help we can get. I hung up and looked at Kieran, seeing my own grim determination reflected in his face. My territory's 2 hours away, I said. Your medical team? Will come with us, he finished. This affects both our packs now. It was a generous offer, especially considering the traditional animosity between our peoples. But as I looked at the broken wolves being loaded onto stretchers, I realized the old feud seemed insignificant compared to the threat we were facing. Thank you, I said, meaning it. He nodded, then surprised me by stepping closer. Close enough that I could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Raven, he said quietly, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't identify. Whatever's happening here, whoever's behind this, we're stronger together than apart. The words hung between us, heavy with implications that went far beyond the current crisis. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to truly trust him, to work alongside him as an equal rather than an enemy. Then reality crashed back, and I stepped away before I could do something stupid like touch him. 36 hours. I reminded us both. We have 36 hours to solve this before the Alliance takes over. Then we better get moving. As we headed back toward the vehicles, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something crucial. The enhanced rogue, the missing wolves, the federal investigation, it all felt orchestrated, like pieces of a larger plan designed to destabilize our entire way of life. The question was, who benefited from seeing the Northwest Pact territories in chaos? And how far were they willing to go to achieve their goals? Chapter 5. Dangerous Ground. The scene at Shadowmir territory was a nightmare mirror of what we'd found at Silverwood. 3 young wolves, barely out of adolescence, huddled together in the medical bay with the same vacant stares and self-inflicted wounds that had marked Kieran's people. Dr. Chen immediately went to work alongside our pack medic, her professional demeanor masking what I knew had to be growing horror at the scope of what we were dealing with. How long were they missing? Kieran asked Marcus as we stood outside the medical facility. 14 hours, Marcus replied grimly. We found them about 2 miles east of the territory line, in what used to be neutral ground. Used to be. Federal agents have cordoned off a 10-mile radius around the kill sites. They're calling it a crime scene, but... Marcus shrugged. It effectively cuts off access to 3 major hunting grounds and 2 sacred sites. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. They're boxing us in. That's what it looks like. And it gets worse. Marcus pulled out his phone, showing us a series of photos. These were taken by our scouts about an hour ago. The images showed military-style vehicles positioned at strategic points around both our territories. Not federal law enforcement vehicles, actual military hardware, with soldiers in full combat gear. National Guard? Kieran asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Unknown unit. No insignia, no identification when our scouts tried to make contact. Marcus looked between us with the expression of someone delivering a death sentence. Raven, they're not just investigating anymore. They're setting up for containment. Containment. The word every werewolf feared most because it meant exposure had already happened and damage control was no longer possible. It meant our secret was out, and the human government was moving to neutralize what they saw as a supernatural threat. How long do we have? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Based on their positioning and the rate at which they're establishing checkpoints? 6 hours, maybe 8 before they have both territories completely locked down. 6 hours. Not the 36 we'd been promised by the council, not even the 48 we'd started with. 6 hours to solve an impossible puzzle before everything I'd worked to protect was destroyed. There has to be something we're missing, I said, more to myself than to the others. Some connection we haven't seen. The enhancement compound, Kieran said suddenly. Dr. Chun, you said it was artificially created. That kind of biochemical expertise isn't exactly common knowledge. Dr. Chun looked up from her work with one of the traumatized wolves. You're right. Creating something this sophisticated would require advanced knowledge of lupin physiology, access to specialized equipment, and months of testing. So, we're looking for someone with scientific credentials, I said. Someone who understands our biology better than most of us do. And someone with access to test subjects, Marcus added grimly. The implication hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Test subjects meant other wolves had been captured, experimented on, possibly killed in the development of this weapon. How many had died to create the compound that had broken our young pack members? There's something else, Dr. Chin continued, her voice carefully neutral. The delivery method for the compound. It wasn't injected or administered orally. Then how? Inhalation. Specifically, through scent marking. She gestured to one of the unconscious wolves. The chemical residue is concentrated around the nasal passages and throat. Someone created an aerosol version of the compound and disguised it as territorial marking. Ice formed in my stomach. Scent marking was one of the most fundamental aspects of pack behavior. We trusted our noses above all other senses, relied on scent communication for everything from identifying threats to finding mates. They weaponized our most basic instincts, I whispered. Worse than that, Kieran said, his face pale with understanding. They turned our own biology against us, made us vulnerable by doing what comes naturally. My phone buzzed with an incoming message from Riley. Emergency at the eastern border. You need to see this. Now. I showed the message to Kieran, who nodded grimly. Dr. Chun, continue monitoring the victims. Let us know immediately if their condition changes. Where are you going? Marcus asked. To see what fresh hell is waiting for us at the border, I replied, already heading for the door. The eastern border of Shadowmir territory was marked by a line of ancient oak trees that had stood for centuries, their massive trunks carved with the territorial markers of generations of alphas. It was sacred ground, the kind of place where pack magic was strongest and outsiders were instinctively unwelcome, which made the scene waiting for us there all the more disturbing. Riley stood at the base of the largest oak, her face grim as she pointed to something carved into the bark about 8 feet off the ground. This wasn't here yesterday. I looked up and felt my blood turn to ice. Carved deep into the sacred wood was a symbol I recognized from pack histories, a twisted knot of lines that formed a crude representation of 2 wolves tearing each other apart. It was an ancient warning sign, used by rogues to mark territory they'd claimed through violence. But this version was different, more complex. And underneath it, in stark contrast to the crude carving, was a perfectly precise inscription in what looked like Latin. Can you read it? Kieran asked, moving to stand beside me. I squinted at the carefully carved letters. Divide et impera. Divide and conquer. His voice was flat with understanding. Someone's playing games with us. More than games. Riley pointed to the ground around the base of the tree. Look at the scent markers. The earth was saturated with territorial markings, but not from any pack I recognized. The scent was wrong. Too sharp, too aggressive, with an undertone that made my wolf recoil in instinctive fear. Enhancement compound. I breathed. Concentrated to the point where just walking through here would be enough to trigger symptoms in most wolves, Riley confirmed. We're lucky the wind was blowing away from the territory when I found this. Kieran knelt beside one of the scent markers, careful not to get too close. This is a message. Whoever's behind this wants us to know they can strike anywhere, anytime. But why warn us? Why not just attack directly? Because direct attack isn't the goal, he said, standing and brushing dirt from his hands. Think about what we've seen. The staged kills designed to frame our packs. The missing wolves returned as broken shells of themselves. Federal investigation and military containment. And if we can't? I didn't answer because we both knew the alternative. If we couldn't stop the rogue, couldn't prove our innocence, both our packs would be destroyed by morning. The main floor of the pack house was chaos. Wounded wolves were being treated in makeshift medical stations while others prepared weapons and defensive positions. Through the windows, I could see muzzle flashes in the forest as my people engaged with both the military units and something else, something that moved too fast and hit too hard to be entirely human. Alf, one of my fighters, a young man named Derek, rushed toward us with blood streaming from claw marks on his shoulder. The thing attacking us, it's not natural. Faster than any wolf I've ever seen, stronger too. And it smells wrong. Enhanced rogue, I said grimly. How many of our people are still out there? Maybe 20, scattered through the forest. But Alpha. Derek's expression was grim. Some of our own are turning. The scent markers that thing is leaving behind. They're affecting our wolves. Making them aggressive, unpredictable. The enhancement compound, weaponized and deployed in real time. Whoever had created this monster had found a way to turn our own people against us, without direct contact. Kieran, I said, turning to find him speaking quietly with Marcus, who must have arrived through his own route. We need to end this now, before more of our people are affected. He nodded, his expression grim with understanding. The rogue will be focusing on spreading contamination rather than direct confrontation. If we can track it to its base of operations, we can find out who's controlling it, I finished. And maybe get some answers. Marcus approached us, his face streaked with dirt and something that might have been blood. I've been coordinating with Dr. Chen. She thinks she might have a way to counteract the enhancement compound, but she needs a fresh sample to create an antidote. Fresh sample means getting close to the source, I said. Very close, Marcus confirmed. And the source is currently tearing through the forest while federal agents shoot at everything that moves. Then we go hunting, Kieran said simply. Together. The word hung between us, heavy with implications. Together meant trusting each other completely, meant fighting as true partners rather than reluctant allies. It meant acknowledging the bond between us, even if we weren't ready to accept what it meant. Together, I agreed, because survival trumped personal complications. We armed ourselves with everything that might be effective against an enhanced rogue, silver core ammunition, concentrated wolfsbane extract, and traditional pack weapons blessed by generations of shamans. Then we headed into the forest, following the trail of devastation that marked the creature's path. It wasn't hard to track. The rogue was leaving behind a scent trail so saturated with artificial aggression that it made my wolf pace restlessly beneath my skin. But there was something else in the mix, something familiar that nagged at the edges of my memory. Do you smell that? I asked Kieran as we moved through the trees, carefully avoiding the military patrols that were still searching for us. Base scent under all the chemical enhancement? Yeah, I smell it. His expression was troubled. It's pack scent, but not from any territory I recognize. Not current pack scent, I realized with growing horror. Old pack scent. From wolves who should be dead.
Dead how?
I stopped walking, the implications hitting me like a physical blow. The Moonrise Pack. They were wiped out 15 years ago by what the council called a rogue attack. But what if it wasn't rogues? What if someone needed test subjects for early experiments? Kieran's face went pale in the moonlight. The entire pack was killed. Men, women, children. Except apparently, they weren't all killed. Someone survived. Someone with a very good reason to hate the council, the alliance, and anyone who might have been involved in covering up what really happened. The sound of approaching footsteps made us both freeze, weapons raised and ready. But instead of federal agents or enhanced rogues, Riley emerged from the underbrush with her hands visible and her expression grim. "You need to see this," she said without preamble. "Both of you." She led us deeper into the forest, to a clearing I recognized as one of our sacred sites, a place where the pack conducted full moon ceremonies and initiated new members. But the space had been desecrated, the ancient stone circle broken, and carved with the same twisted symbols we'd found on the oak tree. In the center of the circle lay a body. Not a rogue or a federal agent, but someone I recognized. Someone who should have been safely back at Silverwood territory, coordinating medical efforts with Dr. Chin. "Who is it?" Kieran asked, but his tone suggested he already knew the answer would be bad. "Council messenger," Riley replied grimly. "Thomas Blackwood from the Red River Pack. He's been dead for hours, but here's the interesting part. He was killed by silver bullets, not claws or fangs. Silver bullets meant human weapons. Professional assassination rather than supernatural violence. Someone's cleaning house, I realized. Eliminating anyone who might have knowledge of their operation. Or anyone who might have figured out who's behind this," Kieran added. I knelt beside the body, being careful not to disturb the scene but looking for any clues that might point us toward answers. Thomas had been a good man, a mediator who'd spent decades trying to maintain peace between the territories. If he'd been murdered, it was because he'd learned something that made him dangerous to our enemy. That's when I saw it. Clutched in his right hand was a small piece of paper, partially hidden by his fingers. "Riley, do you have gloves?" She passed me a pair of latex gloves from her field kit, and I carefully extracted the paper from Thomas's death grip. It was torn from a larger document, but the fragment that remained was enough to make my blood run cold. It was a list of names. Pack leaders, council members, and other influential wolves from across the Northwest Alliance. Most of the names had been crossed out with red ink, but 3 remained unmarked. Elder Christine, Kieran's name, and mine. "We're next," I said quietly. "No," Kieran replied, his voice hard with determination. "We're done running. We're done reacting to someone else's game." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we go on the offensive. Find whoever's behind this and end it before they can eliminate the last witnesses to whatever they're covering up." "And how exactly do we do that when we don't even know who we're fighting?" Riley cleared her throat. "Actually, we might have a lead on that." She pulled out her phone, showing us a series of photographs. "I've been tracking the enhancement compound's chemical signature through the forest. The concentration is highest in a specific direction, due east, toward the old mining complex." I knew the place she meant. An abandoned copper mine that had been shuttered decades ago, too deep in national forest land for any pack to claim as territory. The perfect place to conduct illegal experiments without interference. "How far?"
Kieran asked.
"Maybe 3 miles. But here's the problem. The federal agents have established a perimeter around the entire area. Getting close enough to investigate will mean getting through military-grade surveillance." "Then we go underground again," I said. "If your grandfather's tunnel network extends that far." "It does," Kieran confirmed. "But those passages are in worse condition than the ones we used to get here. Unstable, possibly flooded in places. Still better odds than fighting our way through federal agents." "Agreed. But if we're wrong about this, if the mine isn't the source, then we're all dead by morning anyway." I looked between them, these 2 people who'd become my closest allies in the space of a few desperate hours. Are you both willing to risk it? Hell yes, Riley said immediately. Kieran's answer took longer, and when it came, it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said to each other.
Yes.
With you, I'm willing to risk everything. The mate bond flared between us, warm and electric and impossible to ignore. For a moment, standing in the desecrated sacred site with a dead council member at our feet and enemies closing in from all sides, I let myself acknowledge what I'd been fighting since that first night on the ridge. He was mine. Enemy, ally, complication. None of that mattered to the fundamental recognition that sang in my blood every time he looked at me. But acknowledgement would have to wait. First, we had a war to stop and a conspiracy to unravel. Then let's go find out who's been playing games with our lives, I said. Because one way or another, this ended tonight. Chapter 7. The Heart of Darkness. The tunnel to the mining complex was everything Kieran had warned it would be, and worse. Water seeped through cracks in the concrete walls, creating puddles that reflected our flashlight beams like dark mirrors. The air was thick with the smell of mold, and something else, something chemical that made my throat burn with each breath. Twice we had to navigate around cave-ins that had reduced the passage to crawl spaces barely wide enough for our bodies. How much farther? Riley whispered, her voice muffled by the improvised mask she'd fashioned from her shirt. Quarter mile, maybe less, Kieran replied, consulting the crude map he'd sketched from memory. But the air quality is getting worse. Whatever they're producing up there, it's seeping into the groundwater. I could taste it now, the sharp tang of industrial chemicals mixed with something organic and wrong. The same wrongness that had been present at every crime scene, every contaminated area we'd investigated. Enhancement compound production. I realized. They're manufacturing it on an industrial scale. Which means there are a lot more enhanced rogues than just the one that's been attacking our territories, Kieran said grimly. The tunnel began to slope upward, and after another 100 yards, we could see light filtering down from above. Not electric light, something flickering and inconsistent that suggested fire or torches. Traditional lighting to avoid electronic detection, Riley observed. Smart. Or ritualistic, I said, remembering the carved symbols and Latin inscriptions we'd found. Whoever's behind this, they're not just interested in chemical warfare. There's an ideological component. We reached a rusty ladder that led up to what looked like a maintenance hatch. Kieran went first, testing each rung carefully before putting his full weight on it. At the top, he paused to listen before slowly opening the hatch. Clear, he whispered down to us. But you're going to want to see this. I climbed up behind him and immediately understood why his voice had carried such shock. We were in a natural cavern that had been extensively modified, carved out and reinforced to create an underground complex easily the size of a cathedral. The walls were lined with sophisticated equipment, chemical processing stations, computer terminals, banks of monitors showing surveillance feeds from locations I didn't recognize. But it was the center of the cavern that made my breath catch in my throat. A massive stone altar, carved with the same twisted symbols we'd been finding at the crime scenes. Around it, arranged in perfect circles, were dozens of metal cages. Most were empty, but a few contained figures that might once have been wolves. Enhanced beyond recognition, their eyes vacant and their bodies twitching with uncontrolled muscle spasms. Jesus Christ, Riley breathed as she joined us. Not Christ, said a voice from the shadows. Something much older, much more powerful. We spun toward the sound, weapons raised, but found ourselves facing someone I recognized from council meetings. Dr. Elizabeth Harrow, former pack doctor for the dissolved Moonrise Pack. A woman who was supposed to have died 15 years ago. She looked exactly the same as I remembered. Middle-aged, professionally dressed, with the kind of calm demeanor that had made her an effective mediator between hostile packs. Except for her eyes. Her eyes held the flat, calculating coldness of someone who'd lost all connection to her humanity. Dr. Harrow, I said, keeping my weapon trained on her despite the civilized conversation. We thought you were dead. I was, for all practical purposes. She stepped further into the light, revealing that she wasn't alone. Behind her stood at least a dozen figures in dark robes, their faces hidden, but their postures suggesting combat readiness. Dead to the pack system that betrayed everything our people once stood for. The Moonrise Pack wasn't betrayed, Kieran said carefully. You were attacked by rogues. Rogues? Dr. Harrow's laugh was bitter and entirely without humor. Is that what they told you? That my family, my entire bloodline, was destroyed by rogues? That's what the official reports say. The official reports are lies. Her voice carried the kind of quiet fury that was more dangerous than screaming. My pack was eliminated because we discovered something the council didn't want known. Something that threatened their comfortable arrangement with human authorities. What kind of something? I asked, though I was starting to suspect I already knew the answer. Federal experimentation on captured werewolves. Medical research conducted with full council knowledge and approval. Dr. Harrow gestured to the equipment around us. This facility isn't new, children. It's been operating for decades, with different management but the same essential purpose: to find ways to control and manipulate our species. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. The enhancement compound, the targeted attacks on specific packs, the federal response that had been too fast and too coordinated to be coincidental. You're working with them, I realized. With the federal agents. I'm working with patriotic humans who understand that the current pack system is a threat to national security. Her smile was cold and entirely satisfied. Alphas like you, with your territorial disputes and your refusal to integrate with human society, represent an existential danger to both species. So you decided to eliminate us? I decided to force evolution. The enhancement compound doesn't just create super soldiers. It breaks the psychological bonds that hold pack structures together. Wolves treated with it become individually stronger, but incapable of the cooperation that makes pack society possible. And the federal containment. A necessary step toward managed integration. Werewolves placed under direct government oversight, stripped of their pack bonds, reduced to individual assets that can be controlled and deployed as needed. The horror of her vision hit me like a physical blow. Not genocide, something worse. The complete destruction of everything that made us who we were, leaving behind hollow shells wearing familiar faces. You're insane, Riley said, her voice shaking with rage. I'm practical. Dr. Harrow's tone remained conversationally pleasant, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the systematic destruction of our species. The old ways are dying anyway. How many interpack wars have we had in the last decade? How many young wolves have been lost to territorial disputes that serve no purpose except to perpetuate ancient grudges? She gestured toward Kieran and me. Look at yourselves. Two alphas from feuding packs, forced to work together only by the threat of complete annihilation. How long do you think your cooperation would last once the immediate danger passed? I wanted to argue, to insist that she was wrong, but the words stuck in my throat. Because part of me, the part that had been raised on stories of Silverwood betrayal, that had been taught to see Kieran as an enemy from childhood, wondered if she might be right. The mate bond changes things, Kieran said quietly, and my heart stopped. Dr. Harrow's eyebrows rose with genuine surprise. How interesting. I hadn't detected that in my surveillance data. She pulled out a tablet, making notes with clinical efficiency. That does complicate things. Fated bonds are notoriously resistant to chemical interference. Which is why you targeted us specifically, I realized. Not just because we're alphas of neighboring packs, but because you somehow knew we were fated mates. Elder Christine is not as discreet as she believes, Dr. Harrow replied with satisfaction. Her communications with certain council members regarding your situation were quite illuminating. Christine, the elder who'd pushed us together, who'd seemed so knowing about our connection. Had she been protecting us or setting us up? But a fated bond between enemy alphas presents opportunities as well as complications, Dr. Harrow continued. Your deaths together will send a powerful message about the futility of trying to maintain the old pack structures. The robed figures around her began to move, spreading out to cut off our escape routes. I counted at least 15, all moving with the fluid coordination that suggested enhanced physical abilities. You enhanced your own people, I said, buying time while I calculated our chances of fighting our way out. I perfected my own people. Dr. Harrow's smile was proud and utterly chilling. The compound you've been analyzing is a crude battlefield version. What my followers have received is much more sophisticated, enhanced strength and speed without the psychological degradation. But at what cost?
Kieran asked.
Enhanced rogues don't live long. The chemical stress on their systems is sustainable with proper medical support, she interrupted. These volunteers have accepted shortened lifespans in exchange for the ability to reshape our species' future. Volunteers. Fanatics who'd chosen to burn out their own lives in service of her twisted vision. The missing council members, Riley said suddenly. You didn't just kill them.
You converted them.
Some proved more amenable to reason than others. Dr. Harrow gestured to her followers. Would you like to guess which of your old allies are standing before you now? I looked at the robed figures with new horror, trying to identify familiar shapes or movements among the anonymous forms. How many people I'd trusted, worked with, considered friends, had been turned into weapons against their own kind. Enough talk, one of the figures said, and I recognized the voice despite the chemical alteration that had made it rougher, more aggressive. Marcus. My beta. My friend. My second in command for 5 years. The betrayal hit harder than any physical blow. I trusted him completely, shared pack secrets with him, relied on his loyalty and judgment. And all the while, he'd been feeding information to our enemies. Why? I whispered, the words scraping my throat raw. Marcus pulled back his hood, revealing a face I barely recognized. His features were sharper, more predatory, and his eyes held the flat coldness I was learning to associate with the enhancement compound. But it was still him, still the wolf who'd stood at my side through every crisis. Because she's right, he said simply. The pack system is broken, Raven. How many good wolves have died defending territorial lines that mean nothing? How many young lives have been wasted on feuds we inherited from our grandparents? So you decided to destroy everything we've built? I decided to save what could be saved. His expression was almost pitying. Did you really think you could hold the territory forever? That Shadowmir could survive another generation of decline. We were rebuilding. You were dying slowly instead of quickly, Marcus interrupted. Pack numbers falling, territory shrinking, young wolves leaving for human cities where they could have actual futures. At least this way, some of our people might survive the transition. As slaves to a government that sees us as weapons. As protected assets with guaranteed security and purpose. Dr. Harrow stepped forward, tablet still in hand, as if documenting our final moments. The era of independent packs is over, children. The only question is whether your people join the new system voluntarily or are forced into compliance. There's a third option, Kieran said, his voice carrying the kind of deadly calm that meant his wolf was very close to the surface. Is there? We stop you here, tonight, before you can hurt anyone else. Dr. Harrow's laugh was genuinely amused. 3 wolves against 15 enhanced fighters in an underground facility designed specifically to contain supernatural abilities. I admire your optimism, but the outcome is hardly in doubt. Maybe not. I agreed, then smiled with more confidence than I felt. But you're forgetting something important. What's that? We're not just 3 wolves. I looked at Kieran, seeing understanding flicker in his storm gray eyes. We're fated mates. And that bond doesn't just change everything between us, it changes what we're capable of when we fight together. Dr. Harrow's expression shifted from amusement to concern. The enhancement process should have severed any supernatural bonds. Should have, Kieran agreed. But fated bonds aren't just supernatural. They're primordial. Older than your chemicals, stronger than your science. I felt it then, the connection between us flaring to life like an electric current. Not just attraction or recognition, but true pack bond amplified beyond anything I'd experienced. His strength flowing into me, mine into him, until we moved as one entity with 2 bodies. The enhanced rogues rushed us from all sides. And we met them as we were meant to, as partners, as equals, as two halves of something greater than either could be alone. The fight was brutal and brief. Enhanced strength and speed were significant advantages, but they couldn't compensate for the perfect coordination that came from a true fated bond. Kieran and I moved together like we'd been fighting as partners our entire lives, each covering the other's weaknesses, amplifying each other's strengths. Riley held her own against 3 opponents, using her smaller size and superior mobility to stay ahead of their enhanced reflexes. But it was the bond between Kieran and me that turned the tide, every movement perfectly synchronized, every attack flowing seamlessly into defense. When the last enhanced rogue hit the ground, Dr. Harrow stood alone among the bodies of her followers, her clinical detachment finally cracking into genuine fear. "This changes nothing," she said, but her voice shook with the knowledge that everything had already changed. "The federal operation will continue. Your territories will still be contained." "Will they?" I asked, pulling out my phone to show her the recording I'd been making since our conversation began. "Because I think Agent Morrison and his team are going to be very interested to hear about unauthorized human experimentation on American citizens." "You can't prove." "Actually, we can," Kieran said, gesturing to the equipment around us. "All of this, your confession, the enhanced rogues, it's all evidence of a conspiracy to commit genocide against an entire species." Dr. Harrow's face went pale as the implications hit her. Federal agents who'd been manipulated into believing werewolves were a threat would respond very differently when they learned they'd been used as weapons in an illegal human supremacist operation. "The Council will never accept your version of events," she said desperately. "They'll protect their own interests." "The Council members you didn't murder, you mean?" Riley interjected. "The ones who are going to be very upset to learn that one of their own has been conducting biological warfare experiments." "Elder Christine knew," Dr. Harrow said, playing her last card. "She's known about the federal arrangement for years." "Christine knew about federal surveillance," I corrected. "That's very different from knowing about human experimentation and enhancement compound production. And I think when she hears this recording, she's going to be calling for some very serious consequences." Dr. Harrow looked around the cavern at her destroyed operation, at the bodies of her enhanced followers, at the evidence of her crimes laid out in electronic files and chemical residue. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked old. Not just middle-aged, but ancient and tired and defeated. "You have no idea what you've done," she whispered. "The old ways are dying. This was the only chance for controlled transition, for saving something of what we were." "Maybe," I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. "But that should have been a choice for our people to make, not something imposed on them by force." "And now," she asked, "what happens now?" I looked at Kieran, seeing my own thoughts reflected in his eyes. We'd stopped Dr. Harrow's immediate plan, but the larger problems remained. Federal agents who'd been lied to would need explanations. Enhanced rogues were still loose in the forest. And 2 rival packs had just fought side by side, revealing bonds that couldn't be easily dismissed or ignored. "Now," Kieran said quietly, "we figure out how to build something better than what came before." "Together," I added, the word carrying the weight of everything we hadn't yet said to each other. Dr. Harrow's laugh was bitter, but no longer entirely without humor. "Fated mates from enemy packs, thinking they can rewrite centuries of tradition. Perhaps there's hope for your species after all." "Perhaps there is," I agreed. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, I was starting to believe it might be true. Chapter 8: Dawn and Reckoning. The federal agents, as it turned out, were not nearly as difficult to deal with once they understood they'd been manipulated. Agent Sarah Morrison, no relation to Elder Morrison, listened to our recording of Dr. Harrow's confession with a kind of professional composure that came from years of dealing with impossible situations. When it finished, she set down her headphones and looked at the 3 of us with something that might have been respect. "Well," she said finally, "that explains why half my surveillance data didn't make sense." We were sitting in the Shadowmir Pack House's main conference room, dawn light streaming through windows that had been shot out during the night's battle. The enhanced rogue had been neutralized, captured alive, it turned out, and already showing signs of recovery as the compound worked its way out of his system. "You knew something was wrong with the operation?" Riley asked. "The intelligence we received was too perfect," Agent Morrison replied. "Detailed layouts of your territories, behavioral profiles that read like psychological assessments, recommended tactics that seemed designed specifically for engaging supernatural targets." She paused, studying Kieran and me with sharp eyes. "Someone wanted us to see you as threats that needed to be neutralized." "Dr. Harrow and her enhanced rogues," I said. "They've been planning this for months, maybe years." 15 years, Kieran corrected quietly. "Since the destruction of the Moonrise Pack. She's been building this conspiracy since the night she was supposed to have died." Agent Morrison made notes on her tablet, her expression grim with professional disgust. "Unauthorized medical experimentation on American citizens. Conspiracy to incite violence between federal agencies and civilian populations. Manufacturing and distribution of controlled biological weapons." She looked up at us. "Dr. Harrow is going to spend the rest of her life in federal prison, assuming she survives the legal process." "What about the other enhanced rogues?" Riley asked. "The ones still out there?" "My teams are equipped with the antidote your Dr. Chin developed. Most of the affected individuals should make full recoveries within 48 hours. Agent Morrison closed her tablet, signaling the end of the official portion of our conversation. "Which brings us to the more complicated question." "Which is?" I asked, though I suspected I knew what she was going to say. "What happens now? Federal agencies know about your communities now, know what you are and what you're capable of." Her expression was carefully neutral. "That information isn't going to just disappear." The question that every werewolf leader had been dreading for decades. Discovery by human authorities had always been our greatest fear, the scenario that could destroy everything we'd built in North America. "Are you going to expose us?" Kieran asked bluntly. Agent Morrison was quiet for a long moment, considering her answer with the weight it deserved. "That depends," she said finally, "on whether you're planning to be a threat to human safety." "We never were a threat to human safety," I replied. "Dr. Harrow manufactured evidence to make it look like we were." "I believe that. But my superiors are going to want assurances. Oversight. Some form of accountability to ensure that what happened here doesn't happen again." "What kind of oversight?" "The kind that lets you maintain your autonomy while giving federal agencies confidence that supernatural communities can police themselves effectively." Agent Morrison leaned forward, her tone becoming less official and more conversational. "Look, none of us want government bureaucrats trying to manage werewolf politics. But after last night, doing nothing isn't an option either." She was right, and I hated her for it. The old system of complete secrecy was broken beyond repair. But the alternative, integration with human government structures, carried its own risks. "We'll need to discuss this with the council," I said carefully. "Any decision about federal oversight would have to be made collectively." "I understand. But you should know that some form of formal recognition is probably inevitable at this point. The question is whether it's cooperative or adversarial." After Agent Morrison left with her teams, Kieran and I found ourselves alone in the conference room for the first time since everything began. The silence stretched between us, heavy with exhaustion, and everything we hadn't had time to address. "So," he said finally, "that happened." "Which part? The conspiracy, the federal agents, or the part where we fought like fated mates in front of witnesses?" "All of it, but especially the last part." He turned to face me, his expression serious. "Raven, what we did in that cavern, that wasn't just enhanced cooperation. That was a full battle bond. The kind that only forms between true mates." I knew. I'd felt it too. The complete dissolution of boundaries between us, the way our movements had synchronized until we'd fought as one entity. It was intimate beyond anything physical, a connection that went to the core of what we were. "I know," I said quietly. And I'm terrified," I admitted. "Not of you, but of what this means. For our packs, for the territories, for everything we've both spent our lives building." It means change, Kieran said simply. The question is whether we guide that change or let it happen to us. Before I could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway. Not the enhanced version who'd betrayed us, but the real Marcus, my beta, looking exhausted and guilty and entirely human. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said, but we have a situation developing. What now? I asked, wondering what else could possibly go wrong. The other pack alphas are requesting an emergency gathering. All of them, including territories from outside the Northwest Alliance. Marcus's expression was grim. News about last night is spreading through the supernatural community faster than we can control it. What kind of news? That the Shadowmir and Silverwood alphas are fated mates. That you fought together against enhanced rogues. That federal agents were involved. He paused, consulting his notes. And that some form of official recognition by human authorities is now inevitable. Kieran and I exchanged a look of mutual dread. The supernatural community had its own politics, its own power structures, and its own strong opinions about how to handle human discovery. How many alphas are we talking about?
Kieran asked.
17 confirmed so far, with more expected as word spreads. They're calling for a full continental gathering, the first one in over 50 years. A continental gathering. The supernatural equivalent of a constitutional convention, used only for decisions that would affect every werewolf community in North America. The last one had established the territorial system we still use today. When? I asked. 3 days. Neutral ground in Colorado, under the supervision of the Elder Council. 3 days to prepare for a gathering that would likely reshape the entire political structure of our species. 3 days to figure out how to present our situation in a way that wouldn't result in civil war between progressive and traditionalist factions. There's more, Marcus continued reluctantly. Some of the alphas are already taking sides. The Eastern Pacts are calling this an opportunity for proper integration with human society. The Mountain Pacts want to declare war on any federal agency that threatens our autonomy. And the others? Waiting to see which way the wind blows. But Raven. Marcus met my eyes with the kind of serious expression that meant he was about to say something I really wouldn't want to hear. There's talk about challenging your authority. Both of you. Some alphas are saying that mated pairs can't maintain proper pack loyalty, that the bond will compromise your judgment. That's ridiculous, I said immediately. Is it? Marcus asked quietly. You've been alphas for less than a week since the bond manifested. How do we know it won't affect your decision-making? Because we're still the same people we were before. Are you? Marcus interrupted gently. Because from where I stand, you both seem different. More connected. More willing to compromise. That might be good for interpack relations, but your own people need to know you'll put their interests first when it matters. He was right, and I hated him for it almost as much as I'd hated Agent Morrison. The mate bond did change things, not just between Kieran and me, but in how we related to our packs, our territories, our responsibilities as leaders. What do you recommend?
Kieran asked.
Prove that the bond makes you stronger leaders, not weaker ones. Show the gathering that cooperation between your packs benefits everyone, not just the two of you. Marcus paused, looking between us with something like sympathy. And be prepared to make some very difficult choices about where your loyalties lie. After Marcus left, Kieran and I sat in the empty conference room as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. Around us, the pack house was slowly returning to normal, repairs being made, wounded being treated, life going on despite the upheaval of the last few days. 3 days, I said finally. 3 days to convince 17 alphas that fated mates from enemy packs can lead effectively. And that federal oversight doesn't have to mean the end of pack autonomy. And that cooperation is stronger than tradition. I looked at him, this wolf who'd been my enemy just days ago, and who now felt like the most important person in my world. The mate bond hummed between us, warm and electric and impossible to ignore. Can we do it? I asked. Together? Kieran smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it reached his eyes. I think we can do anything. Together, I agreed. Because whatever came next, Whether it was federal oversight or pack politics or the complete restructuring of supernatural society, we'd face it as partners, as equals,
As mates.
and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The Continental Gathering was held in a valley high in the Colorado Rockies, on land that had been neutral territory since before the first European settlers arrived in North America. Ancient stone circles marked the ceremonial grounds, carved by wolves whose names were lost to history, but whose power still hummed in the mountain air. I'd never seen so many alphas in one place before. 17 pack leaders from across the continent, each accompanied by their betas and advisors, each carrying the weight of their people's hopes and fears. The eastern packs looked polished and urban, comfortable with the idea of integration. The mountain packs were heavily armed and radiating hostility toward anything that smacked of outside interference. The plains packs seemed cautiously optimistic, while the coastal territories appeared deeply divided among themselves. And in the center of it all, Elder Christine presided with the serene authority of someone who'd seen every possible permutation of supernatural politics over the last 9 decades. Before we begin formal proceedings, she announced as the gathering settled into the great stone amphitheater, I want to address the situation that prompted this emergency session. All eyes turned toward Kieran and me, sitting together in a section reserved for the principals in whatever crisis had brought everyone together. I could feel the weight of their attention, could smell the mix of curiosity, hostility, and calculation that marked predators sizing up potential threats. The events of 3 days ago represent both a crisis and an opportunity, Christine continued. Crisis, because our communities have been exposed to federal scrutiny in ways that threaten our traditional autonomy. Opportunity, because we now have the chance to shape the terms of that exposure rather than simply react to it. What terms? Demanded Alpha Harrison from the Eastern Seaboard Pack, a wolf whose human form wore expensive suits and whose territory included 3 major cities. From what we've heard, federal agents are already discussing oversight protocols. We can either cooperate or be subjugated. That's a false choice, growled Alpha Mountain Walker from the Denver Pack, a traditionalist who'd never met a human he trusted. The only acceptable oversight is no oversight. We've managed our own affairs for centuries without federal interference. And look where that's gotten us, snapped Alpha Rodriguez from the Los Angeles territory. Shrinking populations, young wolves fleeing to human cities, pack bonds weakening with every generation. Maybe it's time to try something different. Different like surrendering our sovereignty? Mountain Walker's voice carried the kind of dangerous quiet that meant his wolf was very close to the surface. Like letting humans dictate our mating practices, our territorial rights, our pack structures? No one's talking about surrendering sovereignty, I said, standing to address the gathering. We're talking about finding a way to maintain our autonomy while proving we can police ourselves effectively. Are we? Mountain Walker's attention fixed on me with predatory intensity. Because from where I sit, it looks like you and your Silverwood mate have already decided to accommodate federal demands without consulting the rest of us. The word, mate, carried just enough disdain to make my wolf bristle with offense. Around the amphitheater, I could see alphas leaning forward with interest, not supportive interest, but the kind of attention predators gave to weakness they might be able to exploit. Alpha Mountain Walker raises an interesting point, said Alpha Chun from the Pacific Northwest Coastal Territories, her tone carefully neutral. How do we know that the bond between Alpha Raven and Alpha Kieran hasn't compromised their judgment? Fated bonds are known to create intense loyalty conflicts. What are you suggesting? Kieran asked, his voice carrying warning. I'm suggesting that mated pairs have different priorities than unmated alphas. Their primary loyalty is to each other, not to their territories or their species. Alpha Chen's expression was sympathetic but implacable. That's not criticism, it's biology. The question is whether that biological reality makes you suitable representatives for decisions that will affect all our communities. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered alphas, and I felt the political ground shifting beneath my feet. This wasn't just about federal oversight anymore. It was about whether Kieran and I would be allowed to participate in the decision-making process at all. The mate bond doesn't compromise our judgment, I said firmly. It enhances our ability to cooperate, to find solutions that benefit multiple parties instead of just our own territories. Does it? Alpha Harrison leaned back in his stone seat, studying us with calculating eyes. Then you won't mind proving it. Proving it how? By choosing, said Elder Christine, her voice carrying the kind of finality that ended arguments. The gathering has prepared a test of your leadership abilities and your loyalty priorities. You'll be given a scenario that requires you to choose between your mate bond and your pack responsibilities. Ice formed in my stomach. What kind of scenario? A hypothetical negotiation with federal authorities, Alpha Mountain Walker said with satisfaction. You'll be asked to represent two different positions, Alpha Raven arguing for maximum pack autonomy, Alpha Kieran advocating for cooperative integration. The scenario will be structured so that compromise is impossible. One position must prevail completely, which means one of you must defeat your mate in public debate. I stared at him in horror. It was a perfect trap, designed to prove that either we'd compromise pack interests for personal harmony, or we'd damage our mate bond for political necessity. Either way, we'd be demonstrated as unsuitable for continental leadership. And if we refuse to participate?
Kieran asked.
Then the gathering will proceed without input from the Silverwood or Shadowmir territories, Elder Christine replied calmly. Your communities will be bound by whatever decisions we make, but you'll have no voice in shaping them. That's not a choice, I protested. That's coercion. That's politics, Alpha Chun corrected gently. The same kind of politics you'll need to navigate if you expect to represent our species in negotiations with federal authorities. She was right, and I hated her for it. Politics among werewolves had always been brutal, but this felt like something new, a systematic attempt to exclude mated pairs from leadership positions, to ensure that only unmated alphas would have decision-making authority. How long do we have to prepare? Kieran asked, his tone suggesting he'd reached the same conclusion I had. The debate will begin in 1 hour, Elder Christine announced. Arguments will be limited to 30 minutes per side, with the gathering serving as jury. The decision will be made by simple majority vote. 1 hour to prepare for a debate that would determine not just our political future, but potentially the future of human-werewolf relations across the continent. 1 hour to figure out how to argue against each other without destroying the bond that had made us stronger than we'd ever been apart. There's one more thing, Alpha Mountain Walker added with obvious satisfaction. To ensure that the debate represents genuine disagreement rather than performative conflict, we'll be using truth-compelling ceremony. My blood turned to ice. Truth-compelling ceremony was an ancient ritual that made it impossible to lie or deliberately mislead, which meant whatever position we argued, we'd have to genuinely believe it was correct. You're asking us to choose which of our core beliefs to sacrifice, I said quietly. We're asking you to prove that you can put species welfare above personal comfort, Alpha Mountain Walker replied. The way any unmated alpha would. Around the amphitheater, I could see the gathered alphas watching with the kind of intense focus that marked the moments before important hunts. Some looked sympathetic, others calculating, but most just seemed curious to see how this would play out. Very well, Kieran said, his voice steady despite the impossible situation. We accept your test. I looked at him in shock, but before I could protest, he continued. On one condition. If we prove that mated alphas can represent conflicting positions effectively, the gathering acknowledges our right to participate in all subsequent negotiations with federal authorities. And if you fail? Alpha Harrison asked. Then we step aside and let the unmated alphas handle human integration however they see fit. It was a massive gamble. Our entire political future wagered on an hour's worth of preparation for a debate designed to be unwinnable. But as I looked at Kieran's determined expression, felt the steady confidence flowing through our mate bond, I realized he was right. We had to take the risk, because the alternative was watching decisions that would affect our people being made, without any input from us at all. Done, Elder Christine said with something that might have been approval. 1 hour to prepare. Then we'll see what fated mates are truly capable of. As the gathered alphas dispersed to prepare for the debate, Kieran and I found ourselves alone in the ancient stone circle where everything would be decided. You realize what you just committed us to? I said quietly. I realize what we committed ourselves to, he corrected. And I realize it's the only chance we have to prove that the mate bond makes us stronger, not weaker. How can we argue against each other while under truth compulsion? How can I advocate for positions I don't believe in? Kieran smiled, and for the first time since arriving at the gathering, it held genuine warmth. Who says you don't believe in them? I frowned, not understanding. Raven, what do you want most for your people?
Safety.
Autonomy. The right to live according to our own traditions. And what do I want most for mine? I thought about it, remembering our conversations over the past few days. Integration. Cooperation with human authorities. An end to the isolation that's been slowly killing our communities. Exactly. Kieran moved closer, close enough that I could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes. We don't disagree about the goals. We disagree about methods. And under truth compulsion, we can each argue passionately for the approach we believe is most likely to achieve what we both want. Understanding dawned. You think your approach is better for achieving autonomy, and I think mine is better for achieving integration. I think cooperation from a position of strength gives us more leverage than resistance from a position of weakness, he confirmed. And you think that preserving our independence gives us more room to choose the terms of future cooperation. He was right. Those were positions we could both believe in, could both argue passionately under truth compulsion. The debate wouldn't be about sacrificing our principles. It would be about defending different strategies for protecting the same underlying values. Think it will work? I asked. I think, Kieran said, taking my hands in his, that we're about to show 17 skeptical alphas what fated mates are really capable of. The mate bond flared between us. Warm and electric and absolutely certain. Whatever happened in the next hour, we'd face it together. As partners. As equals. As mates who were stronger together than apart. And maybe that would be enough to change everything. Chapter 10. Truth and Consequences. The truth-compelling ceremony was more intense than I'd expected. Elder Christine drew the ancient symbols around the debate circle with blessed sage smoke while the gathered alphas chanted in the old language, words so archaic that most wolves understood them only through genetic memory. The air itself seemed to thicken with supernatural energy, pressing against my skin like a living thing that demanded honesty from every cell in my body. When the ritual was complete, I could feel the compulsion settle over me like a second skin. Not uncomfortable, exactly, but impossible to ignore. Every word I spoke from this moment forward would be absolutely true as I understood it, filtered through my own beliefs and experiences, but free from deliberate deception. Alpha Raven, Elder Christine called formally. You will argue for the position that werewolf communities should maintain maximum autonomy from federal oversight, accepting minimal integration with human authority structures. I stepped forward into the circle, feeling the weight of 17 sets of predator eyes focused on my every movement. Honored alphas, I began, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the supernatural pressure of the compulsion. I stand before you today to argue that our survival as a species depends on maintaining the independence our ancestors died to protect. Around the circle, I could see mixed reactions, some nodding with approval, others looking skeptical, a few wearing expressions of careful neutrality. For 3 centuries, werewolf packs in North America have thrived precisely because we remained hidden from human authority structures. We governed ourselves according to laws that respected our dual nature. We resolved disputes through methods that honored both our human intelligence and our wolf instincts. We maintained territorial systems that provided security for our families without threatening human populations. The words flowed easily because they were true, not just factually accurate, but emotionally real. I did believe that our traditional independence had been a source of strength. Federal oversight, no matter how well-intentioned, represents an existential threat to everything that makes us who we are. Human authorities cannot understand the spiritual significance of pack bonds, the necessity of territorial instincts, or the complex social structures that hold our communities together. They will impose solutions designed for human psychology on problems that require supernatural wisdom. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the gathered alphas, seeing the mixture of agreement and concern in their expressions. The events of recent days prove my point perfectly. Dr. Harrow's conspiracy succeeded precisely because federal agents were manipulated into seeing us as threats to be controlled rather than citizens to be protected. Human authorities approached our communities with weapons and containment protocols because they fundamentally cannot trust what they don't understand. Alpha Mountain Walker nodded with visible satisfaction, while Alpha Harrison frowned thoughtfully. Integration advocates will tell you that cooperation is inevitable, that we must choose between voluntary compliance and involuntary subjugation. I reject that false choice. We have a third option: prove our ability to self-govern so effectively that federal oversight becomes unnecessary. I could feel the truth compulsion thrumming through every word, confirming that I genuinely believed what I was saying. And I did believe it, even knowing that Kieran was about to argue the opposite position with equal conviction. Establish clear protocols for addressing supernatural crimes. Create interpack justice systems that demonstrate our commitment to protecting human safety. Develop communication channels with federal agencies that provide transparency without surrendering sovereignty. Show them that werewolf self-governance is more effective than federal management could ever be. And what happens when federal authorities demand more than transparency? Alpha Rodriguez called out. When they insist on direct oversight regardless of our self-governance efforts. Then we negotiate from a position of strength rather than compliance, I replied immediately. A unified supernatural community that has proven its competence and reliability has far more leverage than scattered packs begging for federal protection. The truth of those words rang through the circle like a bell, and I saw several alphas exchange thoughtful glances. Our ancestors didn't hide from humans because they were weak, I continued, feeling the conviction build in my chest. They hid because they understood that some freedoms are worth any price to preserve. The freedom to raise our children according to pack traditions. The freedom to resolve disputes through challenge rather than litigation. The freedom to form bonds and territories based on supernatural instincts rather than human bureaucracy. I moved to the center of the circle, feeling the ancient power of the sacred ground beneath my feet. I'm not arguing for isolation. I'm arguing for independence. We can work with federal authorities as allies and equals, sharing information and resources while maintaining our right to govern ourselves according to our own laws. But the moment we accept federal oversight, we begin the process of cultural extinction. We become humans who happen to shift into wolves, rather than supernatural beings who happen to live in a human world. The circle fell silent as I finished, the weight of my words hanging in the mountain air. Through the mate bond, I could feel Kieran's mixture of pride and gentle disagreement. He respected my position even as he prepared to demolish it. Alpha Kieran, Elder Christine called. You will argue for the position that werewolf communities should embrace integration with federal oversight, accepting managed cooperation with human authority structures. Kieran stepped into the circle with the fluid confidence that had marked him as an alpha from childhood. Under the truth compulsion, his presence seemed to intensify, every word carrying the absolute conviction of his beliefs. Honored alphas, he began, his voice carrying easily across the amphitheater. I stand before you to argue that our survival as a species depends on evolution, not entrenchment. That the greatest threat to our children's future is not federal oversight, it's the slow death of isolation. Even knowing he was going to argue against my position, I felt my heart race at the passionate conviction in his voice. Alpha Raven speaks of our ancestors' wisdom, and she's right. They were wise. Wise enough to adapt when circumstances changed. Wise enough to hide when hiding offered survival. But circumstances have changed again, and clinging to strategies that worked 3 centuries ago could destroy everything they died to protect. He moved through the circle with predatory grace, his attention focused on each alpha in turn. Look at our territories, honestly. Falling birth rates. Young wolves abandoning pack life for human cities. Traditional mating bonds weakening as potential mates choose careers over pack responsibilities. We're not thriving in isolation, we're slowly suffocating. The words hit like physical blows because they were true. Every pack leader in the circle had dealt with the same problems, the same gradual erosion of pack structures. Dr. Harrow's conspiracy succeeded not because federal agents were inherently hostile to us, but because we had no legitimate relationship with human authorities. No communication channels, no mutual understanding, no framework for cooperation. We were strangers to them, which made us easy to demonize. Alpha Harrison leaned forward with interest, while Alpha Mountain Walker's expression grew increasingly hostile. Federal oversight doesn't have to mean cultural destruction, Kieran continued. It can mean partnership. Human authorities bring resources we desperately need, legal protection, medical research, economic opportunities that could revitalize our communities. At what cost? Alpha Mountain Walker interrupted. At the cost of admitting we're not separate from human society, we're part of it, Kieran replied without hesitation. Our young wolves already know this. They work in human businesses, attend human schools, form relationships with human friends. They're integrating whether we approve or not. The question is whether we guide that integration or let it happen without our input. Through the mate bond, I could feel his absolute conviction in these words, his genuine belief that cooperation offered more hope than resistance. Managed integration allows us to preserve what matters most while adapting what needs to change. Pack bonds remain sacred, but they're protected by federal law rather than secrecy. Territorial rights are maintained, but they're backed by legal recognition rather than force. Our children grow up proud of their dual nature instead of hiding half their identity. And when human bureaucrats decide our traditions are inconvenient, Alpha Chin asked, when they demand changes to our mating practices or our leadership structures? Then we negotiate from a position of legal recognition and mutual benefit, Kieran answered immediately. Human authorities need our cooperation to manage supernatural crime, to understand threats like Dr. Harrow's enhancement compounds, to protect their own citizens from rogue supernatural activity. That gives us leverage, but only if we're partners, not fugitives. I watched the gathered alphas as he spoke, seeing the mixture of hope and fear in their expressions. Hope for a future where their children wouldn't have to choose between their wolf nature and their human opportunities. Fear that integration would mean the death of everything that made them unique. The mate bond between Alpha Raven and myself proves my point, Kieran said, his eyes finding mine across the circle. Traditional pack hostility kept our territories weak and isolated. But cooperation, genuine partnership, made us stronger than we'd ever been separately. The same principle applies to human-werewolf relations. The truth compulsion thrummed through his words, confirming what I already knew. He believed absolutely in everything he was saying. I'm not arguing for surrender, he concluded. I'm arguing for strategic alliance. For choosing the terms of integration before they're imposed on us. For building a future where our children can be proud of what they are instead of hiding in the shadows. The circle fell silent again, the weight of both arguments hanging in the mountain air. Around the amphitheater, the gathered alphas sat in thoughtful contemplation, weighing the merits of two fundamentally different approaches to an impossible situation. Elder Christine stepped forward, her ancient eyes moving between Kieran and me with something that might have been approval. The debate is concluded, she announced formally. The gathering will now deliberate and vote. But before anyone could move, Alpha Rodriguez from Los Angeles stood up. I have a question, she said, her voice carrying the kind of careful neutrality that suggested dangerous territory. For both alphas. Christine nodded permission for her to continue. You've both argued passionately for your positions, and the truth compulsion confirms that you believe what you've said. But I want to know, if you were forced to choose between your mate bond and your political position, which would you sacrifice? The question hung in the air like a blade, designed to expose the fundamental conflict between personal loyalty and principled leadership. Around the circle, I could see the other alphas leaning forward with predatory interest. Under the truth compulsion, I couldn't lie or evade. Whatever I said would reveal my deepest priorities, my ultimate loyalties, my true nature as both alpha and mate. I would sacrifice any political position to preserve my mate bond, I said, the words coming out before I could think to stop them. But I would never sacrifice my principles to preserve any relationship. Even if those principles put your mate at risk? Alpha Rodriguez pressed. Even then, I confirmed, feeling Kieran's surge of pride and love through our connection. Because the mate who loved me wouldn't want to be protected at the cost of my integrity. Alpha Kieran? Alpha Rodriguez turned her attention to him. I would die before I let anything harm my mate, he said simply. But I would also die before I asked her to become someone she's not for my sake. The bond between us is sacred precisely because it connects us as we truly are, not as we might wish each other to be. The truth compulsion confirmed every word, and I felt tears sting my eyes at the absolute honesty of his declaration. So you're both saying, Alpha Rodriguez continued with growing satisfaction, that your mate bond makes you stronger in your convictions, not weaker? Yes, we said together, and the synchronization wasn't planned. It was the natural result of perfect understanding. Then I call for an immediate vote, Alpha Rodriguez announced. Not on which position wins the debate, but on whether mated alphas should be excluded from continental leadership. Elder Christine raised an eyebrow. That's not the question we gathered to address. Isn't it? Alpha Harrison stood up, his expression thoughtful. Because what I've seen today suggests that fated mates might be exactly what our species needs in leadership positions. Two perspectives, passionately argued but respectfully disagreed with. Absolute honesty about priorities and principles. And the kind of cooperation that turns opponents into allies without requiring either to surrender their fundamental beliefs. Around the circle, other alphas began to nod with growing understanding. They didn't choose between their bond and their principles, Alpha Chin observed. They used their bond to strengthen their principles. Which suggests, Alpha Mountain Walker said slowly, that maybe we've been asking the wrong questions about mate bonds and leadership. Elder Christine smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose long-term plans were finally coming together. Very well, she said. All in favor of confirming Alpha Raven and Alpha Kieran as qualified representatives for continental negotiations with federal authorities. Hands rose around the circle, not unanimously, but clearly a majority. Motion carries, Christine announced. Now, shall we discuss the actual terms of integration? As the gathering settled into serious negotiation, Kieran and I moved to stand together at the edge of the sacred circle. The truth compulsion was fading, but the honesty it had revealed remained. Think we passed their test? I asked quietly. I think, Kieran replied, taking my hand in his, we just rewrote the rules about what leadership looks like. Through our mate bond, I felt his absolute certainty that we could face whatever came next. Federal oversight, pack politics, the challenge of building something new from the ruins of old traditions. All of it seemed manageable as long as we faced it together. Together, I agreed, and for the first time since this nightmare began, the future looked bright with possibility. Because we'd proven something that no one had expected, least of all ourselves. Fated mates didn't make weaker leaders. They made leaders strong enough to change the world. Epilogue. 3 months later, the first formal werewolf-human cooperation treaty was signed in Washington, D.C., with Alpha Raven Shadowmir and Alpha Kieran Silverwood serving as primary negotiators. Their territories became the pilot program for supernatural federal cooperation, proving that ancient enemies could become the strongest of allies when bound by love, trust, and shared purpose. And in the mountains of Colorado, where two rival packs once stood ready for war, construction began on the first Interpack Community Center, a symbol of the new world they'd fought to build together.